Welcome to another episode of Selling on Giants, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of e-commerce and bring you actionable insights from industry leaders. I'm your host, Mr. Will, and today we have a very special guest joining us. We are thrilled to have Oz Merchant, the CEO of ecom Sellers HQ, with us. With 25 years of experience spanning retail, wholesale, and high-tech startups, Oz is a seasoned entrepreneur who has successfully launched, scaled, and exited multiple businesses. He's also coached and consulted e-commerce and startup founders across 5 continents, helping them achieve their business goals. In this episode, Oz will share his expert tips on how to launch, grow, and ultimately exit your e-commerce brand. Whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, this episode is packed with valuable advice and strategies to help you navigate the complex e-commerce landscape. So let's get started. We're excited to have Oz on the show, and we can't wait to learn from his wealth of experience. So Oz, with 25 years of experience in retail, wholesale, and high-tech startups, you've seen the e-commerce landscape evolve dramatically. Can you share some of the biggest changes you've witnessed and how they've influenced your approach to launching and scaling e-commerce brands?
Sure, Will. I appreciate, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's interesting. My background is starting in brick and mortar. So when I think back on those days, it's such a radically different shift because you were doing in the retail days, there's so many different things you'd be worried about from how you're going to lay out a store, what type of products you're going to bring in, what's going to get and moved, in the front of the store versus the back of the store, what's going to be above like eye level, what's going to be below eye level. And this was back in the days where we didn't have like computers and stuff either. Everything was hand tickets, the pricing and stuff. So you'd go through, you put the price on it, you go through market with their red line and put a sale price on it. You also have to keep an eye on somebody not just randomly coming in with their own red pen, marking a price down and trying to say, okay, well, this is this price, I'm going to go buy it at the discounted price. So the different things you'd have to worry about were so radically different, including like lights and stuff. I mean, we'd worry because it was like a lot of apparel stuff. So it would be looking at the lights, making sure the products are getting the right amount of lighting, but not too much so they're not fading the clothes and stuff. So it's so radically different when you think about e-commerce, but at the same time, there's different things you have to worry about, meaning that, in an e-commerce world, you're getting this visual medium, you're getting photographs. Now you've got a lot more video prevalence, so that's great. So you're getting potentially video and audio access. And then on that, it's just words. So that's what's conveying. You're not having a salesperson there to talk to somebody, have them try something on, get a feel for it. So you're having to really cut out all those modalities and just have kind of your words tell the story and your photos, images, and videos do that for you. So it's very limited, but it's still amazing to see how much people buy through that. Now, one of the other things that's probably changed a lot is the fact that, in those days, people would just buy and you really wouldn't return because either you got to try it on, test it and stuff, so you weren't returning it as much. But now everything's about returns, right? You can buy anything, you test it out, and you return it. In fact, I've seen behaviors in retail change, meaning that I would typically just try something on when I'm at the store, and I'm like, I don't want to mess with all that. I'm just gonna buy it. I'll go home. I'll try it on. If I don't like it, if it doesn't fit well, I'm just gonna go take it and I'll just return it later. So that return mindset has now transferred from e-commerce into kind of the brick and mortar world. So everything is now, I should be able to return it. I'm not going to buy anything if I can't return it. So that's really changed how I think consumerism and how the consumer thinks. So, when you think about launching, I think, and when I was started, so I started selling on Amazon in 2005, and this was pre FBA, pre anything really. It was just when I was doing it, it's like I was selling some stuff on eBay, so I was like, hey, let me extend that onto Amazon because that had got launched, and I think they're opening up for 3P stuff. So go sell some stuff there. But now it's over the last 15, 18 years, it's changed so much that you have to think about, is that where you want to start? So that's, I guess, the first thing to look at. Are you going to launch on, which channel are you looking at? Are you going to go launch on a marketplace or are you going to go D2C? Because if you're going D2C, it's a very different approach than if you're going to go into a marketplace. And I see when I talk to folks, the mindset is very different. The D2C mindset is you're not coming up as kind of like, well, this is kind of a little side hustle and stuff, and I'm going to go uh, take this to market just because, A, most likely you're not doing resale, you're doing kind of your own brand. And for that, you need to really have thought through what am I doing? And the cost of it is just, it's a lot higher versus the marketplace. Okay, well, I can just buy anything. Let me, do arbitrage. Let me start with a little bit of wholesale and work my way up to doing a brand on a marketplace. So I think it begins when you look at e-commerce is how much finances do you have?
Mm.
What's your outcome you're going for? Is it to just have a little bit of a side hustle money? Is it I wanted to build out a particular brand? Do I want to have a full out empire? Or do I just want you to have a few extra $100 to
Mhm.
take a little extra vacation this month, or pay for this kids camp or Christmas presents. So the intention makes a huge difference as to how you want to launch and where do you want to launch and how do you want to go execute that. Because I see a lot of folks on the arbitrage side, they will take the summer months off. It's like, if you take time off, well, it's a business.
Yeah.
If you're down the road, if you're ever thinking about getting funding and stuff, all that stuff makes a difference. If you have fluctuations in your sales volume, that's going to have an impact of how somebody's going to be looking at your business. So all that stuff gets, I think, factored in. And the other part of it is from a supply side. Okay, if I'm not buying domestically, not using reselling, going for domestic suppliers, okay, where am I going? Things like Alibaba have totally changed the face of where things
Yeah.
were at 20 years ago. Now, the fact that anybody can just say, I'm going to go onto Alibaba and see if I can go buy something and see if I can take it to market here.
Yeah.
Uh, and so the barrier to entry is just over time just come down considerably.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. There's good and bad to that, meaning that there's so many more products out there on the market than there were 20 years ago. But this is America, so we're
Yeah.
very much consumers first kind of market.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go
Capitalism
test
at its
something, go
finest.
exactly. Come here, see if it will sell, and then see if you can do something with it. So
Yeah.
I think the idea people talked about like this kind of American dream, what you can do with e-commerce, it's made it a lot more possible
Yeah.
than I think ever before.
Yeah. A lot of brands start out e-commerce first. I know personally, like I watch a lot of Shark Tank, and 9 times out of 10, if they're a launch brand, what do you have? You have your D2C website, and they're always on Amazon. And those are some really great points. And you unpacked a lot there from the self, the transition of retail to kind of a self-service model being online, the return rates and all the difficulties there. And we're going to get a chance to jump into all that when we kind of dive deeper into our main topic. But Oz, a bit about you. Can you describe some of your successes and your experience in e-commerce or just generally as an entrepreneur in this space?
Yeah, so when I usually share with folks, I've had kind of three acts. Act one was all about retail, wholesale, and manufacturing. I've got kind of background in degree and stuff in supply chain and production. So I knew that space really well. Then I got into the world of high tech and doing software and did six startups there, on the seventh one now. Three of those fortunate enough to have exits. So e-commerce was a perfect kind of blend of those two worlds to take that brick and mortar, combining that with the high tech stuff. And it's like, okay, here's the interesting culmination of two kind of acts into this thing that just makes a lot of sense now. Like,
Mhm.
okay, you can be doing sales and like products and stuff, but just do it all online. And there's all this technology and stuff that's involved that like I said, we didn't have any technology. It was all pen and paper, and now it's all technology. And you got so much data that you can use to make
Yeah.
decisions, where before it was all best guess. And if you weren't paying attention, you just looked at what product's moving, and that's how you decided.
Yeah. That's impressive too. Six companies, six startups. You're working on the seventh, and you were fortunate enough to have, would you say, four exits with
Three of
with
those.
three of those. That is, I mean, that's a lot of entrepreneurs' dreams. So it sounds like you have just quite the experience and very relevant to today's main topic. So let's jump into it. Startup to exit strategies for launching, scaling, and exiting your e-commerce brand. So let's kick it off at the beginning. So launching, we're in startup phase. What are some key factors to consider when you're choosing a niche or product to launch in the e-commerce world?
Once again, I think when you have to decide where you're going to be starting.
Mm.
If you go D2C, so I was just talking to somebody recently that, they had this idea for this product, and he spent like 5K on the prototype.
Oh, it's a lot.
And it's a product, there's some technology involved in it, but that was without any product research, without
Mhm.
any market research to say, what need am I solving for? Yes, there is you know, sure, it's a product you can take to market, but it comes back to, if you're bringing something new to the market, you want to make sure there is enough demand. And part of that means, is there other people using it? And I think a lot of people think of innovation as like, okay, I want to do something radically new. Well, new means it's going to be expensive, meaning that you have to spend a lot of time and money educating the marketplace to
Yeah.
help them understand the need for that product. And if nobody's solving that, so coming from the tech world, talk to investors and stuff. As an investor, one of the things they're always looking at is, what's their competition. Most people fear competition or don't think of competition as a good thing, but competition means a couple of things. One is that there is a need, that somebody is solving that need through whatever products and services, and that they're also kind of absorbing that cost for educating the marketplace.
Mm.
So you want competition because it's going to help to say, okay, there's some validity to what you're kind of taking to market. If nobody's, buying that, if there's no competition from an investor standpoint, they're looking at like, okay, well, maybe there's not enough of a need for that.
Mhm.
It's not a big enough market. Uh, so you want to look at, okay, I've got so many dollars. Do I want to be the one that sits there and spends all my dollars in kind of educating the space? And that's kind of the problem he's going to run into, is the fact that he's something so radically different. When he's looking at it, it's like, well, I can replace so many different things that are on the market, but how much education is that going to take to do
Mhm.
that? And what's the cost of that? And, where do you want to spend that dollars? Is those dollars are going to go into production? Is it going to go into marketing your own product, or marketing the whole market about the
Mhm.
need for that product? So I think a lot of it begins is, okay, where do you want to start? If I'm going to start with the D2C, then I'm doing a lot of kind of customer discovery and market research on my own. If I'm starting a marketplace, Amazon, with all the different tools and technologies that are out there, there's tons of data. You don't have to get creative, you don't have to get innovative. Just use the data that's there, that tells you exactly what the need is, and just do it,
Yeah.
put your own little twist on it, do it better, faster.
Yeah.
And that's how you can kind of stand out.
That's some really good points I hear there. And actually, that's what you said about, educating the market. That's expensive, but also changing consumer behavior is equally as challenging. I look at innovations like you remember Friendster, MySpace, and who's the
Yeah.
champion? Facebook/Meta
Right.
now. There were these concepts, and even Uber had versions of rideshare before it, and Uber, who still can't make money off it, is they changed the consumer behavior, but it took a lot of investment. And then the other side of that is like, how long till we get to profitability? And unless you're a business with really deep pockets, like that's very difficult. And I couldn't imagine being on the side where you're going and asking for funding, like what that looks like, and having to educate your investors before you even have to educate the audience or the customer base on what that opportunity is. And
Yeah.
you hit some really good points. And just to dive deeper, and let's just assume that most of the audience here is not looking to change the world. They just have some really great innovations to product ideas. So market research, I love that. Very important. How do you look at market research for the initial stages of launching an e-commerce brand, and what methods do you recommend?
Yeah. So just to go back on the Uber thing, it was interesting to understand that the bigger challenge was not even the changing the behavior, it was changing something that's so ingrained with most folks, which is, don't talk to strangers. And now you're basically saying, oh, okay, I'm just going to get in a car with a stranger. And that
Yep.
was okay. Taxis at least had this kind of the association that if you saw a yellow cab, or if you're in UK, you see a black cab, that that color and that shape basically made it okay to be getting in there with that stranger. But Uber is like, I don't know who this person is.
Anything.
They're just going to come by and I'm going to get into it. So that was
Yeah.
the biggest hurdle they had, was how do you overcome this trust factor?
Yeah. And you
So
do a
if
lot of
you're,
traveling with Uber. I know some states
oh
I
yeah,
visit, those Ubers are,
I lost
really
my
nice
audio.
Lincoln Town
Right.
cars. And other times I'm getting in a Corolla with a hubcap miss, and I'm like, man, I hope this guy gets me in one piece.
Yeah, I have had some scary incidents where I'm glad that there's the whole technology, which goes back to kind of the whole reviews and all that stuff, kind of validating kind of the benefits and the value of those type of things, because I probably would not have gotten it otherwise.
Yeah, very true. Uh,
Um, so to go back to your question was around doing the market research, right? So
yes. Yep. What are some of the initial stages and for e-commerce brands, and what tools or methods do you recommend if you were, if you're going to launch a brand and you're really passionate about something, like how would you start that market research?
So once again, it goes back to where you're going to launch it. So if you're going with the Amazon, you've got tools like Data Dive, Jungle Scout, Helium 10, all these things that help you.
Mhm.
Even most people don't know about it. If you're going to launch on Walmart, Celebrate is another great tool. It's basically Data Dive, Helium 10 for Walmart specifically. Um, and that team's great over there building something out to solve that problem. But if you're not on one of those platforms where there's a lot of data to help you kind of decipher and make those decisions as to where that need is, um, if you're going D2C, it's really doing a lot of investigative work. It's very similar to how a software company would kind of go to market. It's like, okay, I have this hypothesis, and it goes back to understanding kind of problem space. And do I understand, you know, a lot of people have this idea and they get really excited. So recently, as you know, I do a lot of listening to different pitches for
Mhm.
investor stuff. So, and I noticed when this person was doing this presentation, got really excited about the solution, but just kind of quickly, went over the problem stuff. And one of the feedback I gave was like, there's so much enthusiasm about the solution, but very little kind of care, concern about the problem.
Mm.
And if you really understand the problem space, then you can always pivot and figure out how to best solve it. Maybe it's not this product, maybe it's a different product, maybe it's a different variation of a product or different delivery, different service around it. So if you can really understand the problem, it makes such a huge difference rather than saying, because everybody's like afraid, like, well, I don't want anybody to take my idea. Well, idea really means nothing. It always comes back to execution.
Yeah.
So, and execution is about, okay, understanding the problem well enough to say, this is how to go execute solving that problem. So if you can, take a hypothesis and say, okay, I'm going to go take it to market by asking folks, it could be something as simple as, let me do a survey, put some dollars behind
Mm.
it on Google just to see what kind of click-throughs do I get? Is there enough people searching for that type of problem, and are they clicking through just to see, is there enough interest about it?
Mm.
So there's a lot of things you can do now that are very cost effective that you couldn't do before.
Yeah.
The reach that people have is so incredibly greater than before. You're not having to go just around your neighborhood. It can literally go tap into the whole world or tap into parts of the country or parts of the world.
It's actually amazing. And I think Jeff Bezos, I can't remember if it's Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates, so forgive me as I butcher this quotes, but any idea left in the dark will shrivel up and die essentially. And, it goes to your point is like, people have tons of ideas, but if you're not sharing it, you're also not getting feedback from potentially your market, and so on and so forth. And you're right. Nowadays, I've ran surveys for businesses to get concepts validated in MVP. We use Mechanical Turks. They have like a PickFu
Nice.
software. There's just tons of software. You can really Google it, and there's tons of audience of people ready to give you feedback on everything from your website to your product concept to anything in ideation. So I think
And
this is good.
I was gonna say one piece of that, when you're asking the question, one of the things you want to be mindful of is you have a solution in mind. If you're asking the questions just to validate your solution, that's
Mm,
going to give you skewed data as well. So if you're asking it from the problem standpoint, then you know at least you're getting a true feedback on the problem, not asking in a way that you're kind of priming them to say, well, is this validating or invalidating my potential solution? You really want to ask clean to understand what is their experience with the problem. Because if you understand that, then once again, maybe your solution solves it, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's a variation of it, maybe it's a pivot around it. But then you have a better understanding of the problem, not a yes or no against your own solution, which is a lot of, people ask the problem from a solution frame.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of people get what is it, the chariot ahead of the horse, and it sounds like that's a perfect example. And I think we're all guilty of it, especially as young entrepreneurs who join the space. And to your point, you do hear a lot of pitches, so I imagine people are just super excited about their idea, where it just they may not be solving the right problem. So to your point, and for our listeners, problem first is really the most powerful. And in my experience, I'm sure similar to yours, the brands that really have the biggest impact and resonates the most is like they're solving a very specific problem for a very specific group of people. Being everything to everyone is a fast way to spend all your money, but really not to solve anybody else's problems.
Yeah, one thing I like to always say is, fall in love with your problem, not your product or your
I like
solution.
that.
Because then you'll always know how to, figure out a way to solve for it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Fall in love with your problem, not your solution. You should put that on a coffee mug and a t-shirt, sir. On that note, so can you share some strategies for? So let's fast forward now. We got a product idea. I got an MVP out. I got market validation. My widget, or let's do a pet product. I got a specific pet leash, and this leash has a unique property. So what are some strategies you would recommend for an effective launch on a platform like Amazon, for example, or even Shopify, if you think that's a better route to go?
Yeah, so when so what's interesting about e-commerce is success actually costs a whole lot more than failure. Meaning, like, if something's not going to work, you lost what you lost. But if you're successful, then you have to decide with very little amount of data. I mean, where I'm getting at with this, like, so say you've got a 60-day lead time.
Mhm.
And you basically get into FBA, the product starts selling. If it's going to do really well, you're starting to put ad dollars behind it, you're starting to getting some reviews in. Well, the last thing you want to do is stock out. So you have to very quickly decide, this was my test run of this. So maybe I bought 500 of these. Am I going to commit to the next 1,000 or the 1,500 or 2,000? I have a very short window to make that decision if I want to keep inventory in stock. You can manipulate some things, slow down sales, play with pricing. You have a lot of data, but you have to act a lot quicker, and sometimes with a lot less data. And look, at the end of the day, good entrepreneurs and stuff are typically making decisions with about 40 to 70% certainty.
Mm.
That if you're doing it too soon, you're gonna have a misstep. If you're waiting too long, you're missing opportunities.
Yeah.
So you want to have about a 40 to 70% certainty to say, yeah, let's, pull the trigger on whatever decision it is. Either, no, this is not going to work, let me kill it off, or yeah, let me go to take further action on it.
That's
So
a that's a really good point too. And just chime in, like we've seen the inverse of like somebody having success for a product that went really well. But I love it in novelty because I see this a lot in novelty category where, like look at fidget spinners where, if you were first to market with that, you were selling them like hotcakes. But if you committed to maybe a 10,000 piece order as these products were fading out, you're gonna end up having, these fidget spinners for life.
yeah.
And it happens. But then, what do? You're tying up all your capital. You don't have money for marketing and building an audience, and you're really limiting your ability to grow and expand your brand, which I would say is pretty important early in your early days as you're solving a problem and bringing a product to market. Do you have any additional comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to also when are you launching, and what is the a product you're launching? Is it something that is a kind of a stable need, or is it something that's very topically? It's just a trendy thing that you want to tap in and jump on that will maybe have a short life, but you can make a lot of money very quickly. For example, during COVID, I knew so many people that were just making so much money on masks very, very early
Mhm.
on. They figured out, they tapped in, and they were getting, just hundreds of thousands of masks coming in because they just figured that it's a bit of a gamble because it was really early. I mean, we're talking, I think around April of
Wow, that was
2020,
early on.
really early, and they just, if you're tapped in, I mean, granted, some of these people were tapped into, they're already buying a lot of stuff from China, so they're getting a lot of information coming in. So they started importing stuff in very early. You just never know. You mean it could have all blown over inside of 6 weeks, and you would have been just sitting on containers and containers of
Hmm.
masks. In their case, they literally bought containers and containers, and they still didn't have enough.
Yeah.
So, it depends on something like that versus I'm going to go do a tooling product that, it's going to still sell pretty steady throughout the year.
Hmm.
Or it's like a beach item that, okay, well, it's going to have a season in summer, Q2, Q3 will do really well, but I need to have other products throughout the rest of the year. Otherwise, I'm going to have a very kind of lumpy sales cycle, which, I see a lot of folks do. They started off with a product that is very seasonal, and they didn't quickly add additional products throughout the rest of the year, and makes it hard to scale that type of business because once again, a lot of times you're in this business to really scale, you're going to need outside capital at some point. And
So,
from that standpoint, you need to have kind of consistency in sales, and that's where it becomes a challenge.
and the consistency makes sense, and you see it across the board. We work with a lot of sunblock brands and bathing suit brands, and they're always looking, especially in apparel. It's like, okay, we have our summer line. How can we take this and move a winter line? So at least we have that consistency throughout the year. Because to your point, if eventually the plan is to grow this thing to exit, investors, and you'll know this better than I do, they're going to want to see that consistency, and they're going to want to see that pretty steady growth trajectory. So being aware of that. So actually, before we jump on the next section, how early on in the process are you thinking of what my product's going to look like at an exit? Is that something you're thinking from day one, or is that more as the opportunity comes and you're just focused on doing the reps?
Yeah, I think, it depends on what the intent was to get into the business. If you knew you're getting into the business to, like when I talk to people, I've talked to some Amazon sellers, they're on product five. They mean they've had four prior exits. I mean, they know their whole job is they're going to get in, get out. They're doing it, they're turning it really inside of 24 to 36 months. And they've just gotten down, they figured out the machine and they know how to work that machine. So that's a very different intent than somebody that started off with, retail arbitrage, went to wholesale, decided to go launch their first product. And it's kind of every step of the way is testing the waters. They're not yet thinking brand. They're not yet thinking what that brand means because until you have that brand, you really don't have any intellectual property. You don't have anything, which goes back to, what type of business are you in? There's cash flow businesses and there's growth businesses. And I come across this a lot where people don't understand what type of business there is. And if they, like a cash flow business, you need to be taking money out on a regular basis. Too many people reinvest money in a cash flow business, and there's no point in reinvesting money in a cash flow business. I mean, you do some, but not to the same extent you would on a growth because there's no exit event the same way you would have on a growth business where you're going to have a brand. So if you're coming from that kind of retail arbitrage, wholesale background, you need to have that shift in mindset to say, okay, now I'm shifting to a growth type business. Then what do I want to do? Because now I actually have a potential for an exit. Have a potential for an exit. What does that look like? Am I launching this brand as a separate P&L and a separate business? And I'm gonna, use some of that funds to basically go start this next company that's a brand and then sell that off while this cash flow business keeps basically fueling these other types of ventures. That's a perfectly, good strategy to have. But, at that point, yes, you want to be thinking, where is the end point in this? Is it uh, a product that I can see there's some big buyers for this? If it's a CPG, maybe it's a Unilever that could potentially buy it because, yeah, I know they kind of buy these type of brands.
Mm-hmm.
And can I get it big enough to be attracted to somebody of that size and scale?
Yeah. For those
So
companies too, is it better to build it from the ground up or just buy yours that you already have an audience? So it's almost a no-brainer. And I'm actually
uh,
really glad we're talking about finance, and this will kind of tie into scaling the business. But for entrepreneurs to effectively manage cash flow and finances, or sorry, how can e-commerce entrepreneurs effectively manage cash flow and finances during a scaling phase? So we're deciding to scale up. Maybe we're gonna have a reduced ROAS. How do you make sure you stay positive enough to make sure you keep the lights on, you're able to buy inventory? Do you have any tips and tactics around financing?
yeah, so one is having sales consistency, quickly identify, if you've got seasonal products and stuff, bring in more products so you're going to have consistency throughout the year. The other is just managing your books. It's crazy how many people I come across that just, they're like, I like the creative aspect of e-commerce and that, but I don't do numbers. It's the fact I've heard I don't do numbers so much is it scares me because e-commerce is so big in numbers. I mean, it's such a capital intensive business. It I would lose sleep at night if I didn't have kind of an awareness and understanding of my numbers. And this space with there's so much money movement that takes place. It's easy to not know. So, for example, I was working with somebody who didn't know that the previous month or 2 months back, every product that was sold, every order for that particular SKU, they lost $14 on.
Oof,
Um, because
that
just
could add up.
the ad spend was way too high and they're just losing money.
Mm,
So, you know, once again, there's so much that's happening. You've got so many different SKUs. It's easy to miss something until it's too late. So staying on top of all of that is very crucial. The other is, like I said, the consistency. The other is blending outside capital in, meaning that
okay.
I come across so many people that there's a pride in I did this with my own money, I did this on my own, until they can't, and then
Mm,
they go for outside capital. It's very hard to get money when you need money.
hmm,
It's easier to get money when you are doing well and you have options. It's going to be always cheaper money when you don't need it than when you do need it. It's going to cost you a lot more, and you may not be able to get it at all. So ideally, if you can start blending in outside capital and say, okay, if I take, this much of my money and I reinvest it back into the business, how do I say I'm going to start blending in about 30% of that from outside capital
hmm,
and 70% of that's going to be my own money. So start blending that in. You're mitigating some of that risk. You're also pocketing some of that money, taking it outside the business so that you can have kind of, especially if you're doing Amazon, at some point
mhm.
along the way, you're going to get account suspension or something's going to happen because at the end of the day, it's Amazon's world. So
Yeah,
you want to have money parked away for what I call your sleep well number, whatever that number is, so that you know that whatever problems and stuff you run into, you've got the capital to go, pay attorneys, whatever it takes to
mm,
get everything back open.
that's a really
And
good point.
and that number keeps growing, meaning like if you got a $10,000 store versus if you got $1 million store,
Hmm.
the problems are going to get bigger. The amount of dollars it's going to take to solve that problem is going to get bigger. So you want to have that, I think of it as a percentage that keeps scaling with you.
Mm, that makes sense. And that 30% is really a good benchmark of trying to acquire capital. And what are some vehicles for capital that some of our sellers should be aware of? Is it just straight going to the bank, or am I knocking on VC doors right away? Is it relatively easy to get access to the capital? Like in your experience, how, for an e-commerce seller who's selling, let's just hypothetically, it's their first business and they want to scale, they have good numbers, they're profitable. What would you recommend to get started without obviously giving up equity, unless that's the name of the game?
Yeah, so a couple of different avenues, right? So first off, e-commerce is very hard for them to go to any traditional bank and get capital just because they have nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Traditional banking looks at, okay, what are you going to collateralize so that I can, underwrite this and give you money? Well, it's e-commerce. Everything's in the air. It's like
Mhm,
there's products and stuff, and no bank's going to go underwrite your inventory because they don't want to get into that business.
mm,
So most likely, if you're taking any type of money, you're usually doing a personal guarantee, which means it's still on you. There's a lot of other in the space. There's other kind of vehicles, options around funding that are specifically around, their financing your revenue. So it's like revenue-based financing. They're looking at that. Some are actually underwriting your inventory. Some are underwriting just kind of the overall business. So there's different ways. There's different companies, and they all have different underwriting strategies of how they do it. But at the end of the day, they are able to give you funding and from a non-dilutive standpoint. So unless you're really ready to give up equity, you want to explore, okay, if I'm going to have an exit, can I have an exit as you keep 100% of that money because I leverage capital without giving up equity? And other times you say, okay, maybe I do want to give up equity. Then you want to go find investors that, are investing in e-commerce brands or CPG brands. And then it's figuring out, okay, well, how much do I want to give up to get the equity and scale the business? And at those times, really, it should be probably less about the money and more about what doors does that investor help you open? What contacts, what, can they be potentially strategic partners? There's a lot of big companies that have strategic investment arms that are looking at, if I put money into this business, this product, maybe down the road, we'll just buy them all together. But they'll make a strategic initial investment. So that could be a potential partner you look at to say, okay, well, maybe I can sell to them. And they can potentially unlock a lot of doors for me. So you want to think about always from the standpoint of money is a piece of it, but network is another. What access am I getting? Portfolio companies, other contacts and stuff, can they get me into retail stores if I want to go that route? So there's a lot more to things than just money, but also depends on where you're at scale and where you're at in the journey. Are you year one into kind of scaling, or are you year 5 into scaling?
That makes a ton of sense. And on the agency side, we work with brands that get acquired, and we end up working with a lot of private equity firms, because when you have a bunch of brands, it's just easier to hire an agency than to hire like individuals. And something I've noticed with the private equity companies that we've had the privilege of working with, they tend to be really siloed into categories. We've worked with private equity that's like just beauty, specific types of beauty brands, and same thing with like supplements. They're solving a problem for either a specific demographic, but like they're drilled down into those categories and they don't really mess around. What I found really interesting is like a lot of these private equity companies will have a mission of like, we want to bring natural remedies to the masses, and then that's how they build their portfolio. So to your point, and for our listeners who hopefully are, if you're at the phase where you're scaling and you're trying to raise money, strategic partnerships really resonates. And while myself as an agency, I don't have as much experience with it, it sounds like Oz, on your side, you've seen it and maybe work with companies as they've gone through this phase of raising money and making these connections and building these relationships.
Yeah, and VCs, private equity, they'll all have a thesis. So you want to make sure you're talking to somebody that's aligned with, your product, and your mission is kind of aligned with their thesis. It's just, respectful of your time and theirs, because it's not going to go anywhere otherwise. But, you should always consider having these conversations, because you never know where that goes, what kind of doors that opens just from having the contacts and stuff. Plus, you got to start getting a sense of what's the valuation of my company. How does somebody else, as a potential acquirer, look at it? And then it also goes back to what's the reason to sell, which, and we may, I don't know if we want to go there just yet, but it's like, that is something to think about. Why are you selling? What's the objective you're going for at that point?
What are some typical reasons you see sellers wanting to sell? Is it always about the big paycheck? Do you find a lot of them just get burnt out from being in that role? Like, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind sharing some, like, why did you decide to leave your first company or second, third?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of timing. One is just, okay, personal timing. Okay, this is the right move for me where I'm at kind of in my journey. The other is like, okay, if you waited too long, every company has an arc, meaning that, you'll get a sense of, okay, maybe it's time to sell. Maybe you get it right at the tip, at the apex, or you get it right afterwards. If you get it right after, that means you're probably hitting the burnout phase. you're like, okay, I should have probably gotten out 6 to 12 months ago. And the other factors could be that it's just the market, meaning that what's happening in the world. I think that to weather what's coming up, I don't have the deep enough pockets to do it, but probably a private equity firm does, or some aggregator may. So it's better for me to kind of exit now. The other is maybe I've hit kind of whatever goal I had in mind. That okay, I set this out, initially was just to have this kind of side hustle, but it's like, if I were got to the point where I got to a $5 million business, I'm happy with that. I feel like I've achieved what I wanted to. Maybe that's the reason. The other is like, okay, you know what? I know Amazon really well, but I'm not about to go tackle the D2C world or other marketplaces or go international. Maybe that's, the next phase for the business, but I'm not the person to go do that. So maybe that's a good time to make that exit.
Wow.
So understanding kind of, what got you into it, and that will help you understand when is the right time to get out of it.
Beautiful. Yeah, and that makes sense too, especially if you don't have the passion. I'm sure after a while you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But also if you don't have the experience, taking a brand international, doing the D2C, like there's a lot that goes into it. A lot of agencies and consultants like work specifically in that area, and that's all they do. So it says a lot about like the knowledge that's required to get success on whatever that is. And now that we're talking about exiting and kind of strategies, can you share some insights on how to maximize the valuation of an e-commerce brand? Like typically, what do you see somebody who's looking to acquire? Like what KPIs are they looking at? And for our sellers in our audience, like what should they be considering if they're getting to the point where they're like, hey, I think we're hitting the apex. What does an investor need to see that they're going to go, yep, let's dance?
I mean, the key thing is going to be with any business is EBITDA,
Mm,
which is really your earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. It's not a number that, going to show up in your QuickBooks and stuff. So you're going to have to talk to your accountant to kind of back into that number. But that's really going to be the key number, or they're looking at SD, which is if you're running the business, then you're basically giving yourself some benefits and stuff, but it's meaning that if somebody else is going to acquire it, you're not going to be that person. So they have to replace you with a manager or operator to cover that expense. So they have to factor that cost in as well. So that's kind of the key metric. Are you talking about the health of the business? And that's what most businesses are evaluated at. It's okay, is there a multiple of the EBITDA? And during the heyday, a couple of years ago, it was people were
yeah.
getting 7 to 8x,
Yep.
which really skewed a lot of people's perceptions
Hmm.
as we're 2024 now, right? So
Yep.
last year or
Put some
so,
aggregators out of business too, man. It was
exactly.
pure mayhem.
So, it had to the last 12, 18 months, I think it's a lot have been just, bringing people's expectations back down to what's
Hmm.
realistic, 4 or 5x. Yeah, I mean, in a brand on wholesale, I've seen up to 2.5x. If you have really good operational efficiencies in place and you've got a specific kind of contracts to resell stuff for particular brands, then they actually have some value in it. But if you're doing straight brands, yeah, 4 to 5x is kind of what you're looking at. And so you want to just have a good understanding of your numbers, make sure that, you've got employee agreements in place, you've got, all your compliance documents in place. If you're doing like supplements and stuff, you've got the reports and show that, everything's been tested properly.
Hmm.
Um, you just want to have all your ducks in rows. This is a business. Somebody's acquiring something that's either value or a headache. So, you want to make sure that you're giving something that's in a good position that somebody's going to go take and make some money off. And some people think about it from the standpoint of, let me not even go execute on this strategy just yet because it's an easy low hanging fruit for somebody else to come in and quickly get some quick returns. Uh, there's a gentleman that I know that he knows his strategy so well from a ad standpoint that he's like, okay, I can take pretty much, if I find the right businesses, I can make a quick 25% increase in business. So every 6 to 12 months, he can just buy a company, a brand, and just turn around, sell it off again. But he'll have increased it by 25%. So
That's somebody who has their processes down to a science, man. That
yeah,
is next level smart. And there's lots of people who do that. Once you figure it out,
exactly,
why
right?
not rinse and repeat if you can make a lot of money?
Exactly. So it's knowing your numbers, it's knowing kind of, choosing the right kind of business to buy. Um, so, if you do it enough times, it's just kind of it's running that playbook, right?
Hmm.
So that's why I see there's another person I know so he's on his brand 5, but prior to that, it's always been different supplements and those type of brands. This time got into retail or into apparel. So radically
That's
different.
a tough category to operate in. I'm
And
not gonna lie.
he's hating every minute of it. It's like
Yeah,
where you have returns up to almost 18-20% versus supplements was just easy. Pretty much,
yeah.
they buy it and it was just sell. And it's repeat, they're subscribe and save, all those things. So you have to decide, do I want to do what I'm good at and do it, quicker and bigger, or do I
Hmm.
want to go explore something totally new and take a risk?
Yep, I like that. And just kind of wrap up exiting real quick. Do you have anything else you think our listeners should know about exiting, about considerations for planning, or uh, any last 2 cents before we
Yeah.
jump on to learn about e-commerce sellers or e-com sellers HQ?
Yeah, one thing I'd say just to folks, look, at the end of the day, when you get into e-commerce, there's a lot of risk. There's high returns. If you were, especially right nowadays where you've got, high yield savings accounts, if you're putting 100,000 in a year, you're going to get 5K back. You can get 5% return. Well, if you took that same 100,000, put it in an e-commerce business, and if you netted out even, a 5% profit, but if you can have 4 turns in a year, well, now you've got 20K. So you got
Mhm.
20% return on that same 100K versus 5%. So, the math can work really well in your favor if you're doing e-commerce, but the challenge with that is it may not as well. So
Yeah,
if you're
man with
doing it,
zero.
exactly. So if you're doing it, take some money out and say, okay, think of it as, this is an asset class. E-commerce is one of the asset classes. I can have other asset classes where I can take that money and put it in. So let me move it from something that's higher return, higher risk, but higher return. And let me move some of that money into lower returns, but lower risk, so that you start looking at this as a whole portfolio and where is my money uh, across kind of that whole portfolio.
Beautiful. And I like that view too, the portfolio view, also reinvesting where it makes the most sense. These are some really great insights on exiting and even just scaling, financing, and launching the business. I feel like we had a really full spectrum conversation today. But now I want to turn it back. I want to learn a little about a project that you're working on, Ecom Sellers HQ. So Ecom Sellers HQ is known for bringing together the fragmented e-commerce ecosystem under one roof. Can you explain the mission behind the brand and how it supports e-commerce sellers in scaling their businesses?
Yeah, it really started off just kind of scratching my own itch. People are always coming to me asking me about, what's a good resource for this or that. It was either in my head or in a spreadsheet I'd put together. So I just decided, let me build out a whole platform because it is so fragmented from, some of the stuff, information being in a Discord, a subreddit, to a Facebook group, to if you didn't hit this event, you didn't hear about it, to a WhatsApp group. I mean, it's just all over the place. So I was like, can we bring all that in one central place, from launching, scaling to exiting in one kind of platform, all the different knowledge, all the different service providers, all the different software, so that you just have it on one place. And what really helped solidify for me is I came across somebody, and she decided to get into e-commerce, spent like $14,000, got the product here and got it FBA. And when we started talking, I was like, well, how much have you allocated for advertising? She's like, I need to advertise. I was like, well, it's not going to sell itself. So she had no awareness of advertising. She had no awareness of doing reviews. In her own
Wow.
mind, the whole business was really just half the business, which is getting the product here and getting it to Amazon, not anything about the other half of the business. So the fact somebody could spend that much money and have that kind of a disconnect is like, that's there's something missing that, you should have enough information, at least centralized, that you can go to wherever you're at in the journey and say, I can come here, I can get enough information to say, okay, what do I need to do next? If I've been at this for a couple of years, what software do I need to be looking at next, or what M&A person should I be talking to? What attorney should I be talking to? So have all those resources in one place so that there's not a misstep in that journey, because it can get very expensive and you could basically put you out of business completely. So
yeah, especially for startup brands, small businesses, like that really resonates. Myself and my co-founder, we started off with retail arbitrage, and I'm sure there's a lot of sellers that's kind of their first route. And to invest that much money, $14,000 when you're working a job that pays 60 a year, for example, that's a lot of savings, and that money could have went towards your family or could have went somewhere else to be put to better use than having inventory in stock. So I definitely understand the benefit of having an ecosystem where we have vetted out agencies and service providers that are there to help these people make sure they're allocating their resources properly and they can go in eyes wide open. So really cool. Do you have anything else to add about ecom HQ, ecom sellers HQ? Anything, any features, anything cool you want to share before we jump on to our final topic?
The platform is completely free. So my only ask to the listeners would be, take a moment, go to ecomservicehq.com and go leave a review for whatever you've had experience with. The beauty is the platform is neutral. So it doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or otherwise. It's a place where you can share whatever your experiences have been with whatever you've used, whether it's a service provider or product, software, a consultant, coach. I mean, like I said, the whole idea is and it still continues to grow. So, because it's constantly changing. That's the other part of it, to keep loading, adding more things as they come across them. And if you don't see something, you can put right from the site, just request to add it. We'll get that added on there. But just leave a review so it helps future sellers on their journey as well. And like I said, you can go read reviews. It benefits you and it benefits others. And it's totally free.
Gotta love the community. Very cool. And I love what you're working on, Oz. We have a little tradition here. We like to discuss the future of e-commerce from some of the most smartest and brightest leaders in the industry. So Oz, on that note, with your extensive experience in retail, wholesale, and high-tech startups, where do you see the future of e-commerce heading in the next 5-10 years in your crystal ball, particularly in terms of technological advancements and consumer behavior?
I grew up in the era of Jetsons, so I'm really still looking forward to where, 3D printing and stuff, I can just push a button at the house and I want clothes. It knows my size. It knows materials I like. It can just create, whatever I want on demand. I think, look, if you can do 3D houses and stuff now, it can't be that far off that, we can have this kind of technology in place to just use all this 3D printing and, push a button. So I'm not sure what the impact that has on brands and stuff. If you say, if everything goes back to, the brand is the raw material. So use my silk or use my, plastic. I don't know what it does to the brands, or maybe the brands or the designs they're selling. And what you're doing is you're taking that 3D printing and this is a template, and I do this template, and that's what the output, and that's what the brand is.
That is pretty exciting. And what I'll say, if everybody in 5 to 10 years from now has a Rosie in their house, remember, you heard it here first from Mr. Oz. Oz, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights and expertise with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Before we wrap up, could you let our listeners know where they can find you, and if you have anything else to add that you'd like to share?
Yep. The easiest way to find me, email is oz@ecomsellershq.com. The website is ecomsellershq.com. The handles are at ecomsellershq. That's probably the quickest way. If you're on LinkedIn, I'm just Oz Merchant on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as well.
Beautiful. Well, just so everybody knows, the links are going to be provided in the show notes, so make sure you check those out. Oz, thanks so much for being here, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Will, thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Selling on Giants. I hope you found my conversation with Oz as insightful and inspiring as I did. Oz has provided us with invaluable tips on launching, growing, and exiting an e-commerce brand, and I'm sure many of us are eager to implement these strategies to grow our own business. Remember, the journey from startup to exit is filled with challenges, but with the right guidance and perseverance, success is within reach. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're tuning in. Your support helps us bring more expert insights and actionable advice to e-commerce sellers around the world. A big thank you to Oz for joining us today and sharing his expertise. Be sure to check out eCommerce Seller HQ for more resources. And also, the links are in the show notes below. Until next time, this is Mr. Will signing off. Keep pushing forward and scaling your businesses. And most importantly, stay classy, people.